The rope burned against her wrists as the early morning wind swept through the cottonwood trees. 17-year-old Emily Carter struggled to keep her toes, touching the dusty ground, her arms numb, her shoulders screaming in pain. The rough wooden sign hanging from her neck read Indian Land in thick black letters. It wasn't meant to explain, only to humiliate and terrify. The men who left her there believed fear would be enough. They drove away laughing, convinced no one would come looking this far beyond the edge of town. As the sun climbed higher, Emily's throat grew dry and her vision blurred. Every sound, the cry of a hawk, the snap of a branch, made her heart race. She thought of her parents, of the argument over land boundaries that had turned ugly too. Quickly, she'd been warned to stay quiet, to stop asking questions. Now, tied to a tree on land no one wanted to claim, she wondered if silence would have saved her. Tears slipped down her cheeks, soaking into the dust below. Miles away, Thomas Redbird moved slowly along the ridge, checking his traps the way he did every morning. At 42, he lived alone on the outskirts of the reservation, a man more comfortable with open land than with people. As a Comanche, he carried the weight of history in quiet ways, ignored meetings, dismissed complaints, and stares that never softened. When he spotted something unnatural near the creek bed, his steps slowed, a rope, a figure too still. As Thomas drew closer, the sign caught his eye. His chest tightened, anger and sadness colliding in his gut. He looked up and saw Emily's face, pale, frightened, barely holding on. For a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself, past and present bleeding together. He didn't speak, he didn't ask questions. He climbed the tree with steady hands, pulled out his knife, and cut the rope clean through. Emily collapsed into his arms, sobbing as feeling rushed back into her limbs. Thomas lowered her gently to the ground, shielding her from the sun with his body. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though he knew safety was never simple. As he helped her toward his truck, Thomas glanced back at the tree, the rope, the sign lying in the dirt. He understood then that this wasn't just about one girl. It was about a land still haunted by old hate, and a choice to finally stand against it. Thomas drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel, the old pickup rattling along the dirt road toward town. Emily sat wrapped in his jacket, staring out the window as if afraid the land itself might turn on her again. Her voice came in broken pieces, about survey markers moved in the night, about men who said her family didn't belong, about threats that sounded like jokes until they weren't. Thomas listened without interrupting, eyes fixed ahead. He had heard different versions of the same story all his life, only the names changed. At the small clinic, the nurse's expression shifted, from concern to shock as she saw the rope burns and the photograph Thomas had taken of the sign before leaving the tree. The sheriff arrived soon after, uncomfortable but attentive. Thomas spoke calmly, choosing his words with care, refusing to let the truth be softened. Emily's parents rushed in, relief collapsing them into tears. Thomas stepped back, present but unobtrusive, until Emily reached for his sleeve and whispered thank you, as if afraid he might disappear. By afternoon, the story had begun to spread. Some in town tried to dismiss it as a misunderstanding, others as a cruel prank gone wrong. But evidence has a way of standing its ground. The sign, the knots, the location, details that refuse to be ignored. The sheriff returned to the creek bed with deputies. Names surfaced. Lines that had been drawn in pencil were redrawn in ink. For once, the land dispute was not buried under silence. Thomas returned to the ridge as the sun dipped low, the cottonwoods casting long shadows. He felt the familiar pull of solitude. But something had shifted. The land seemed quieter, not because the past had been erased, but because it had been acknowledged. Days later, Emily sent a letter, careful handwriting filling the page. She wrote about healing, about fear. loosening its grip, about learning the real history of the place she called home. Weeks passed. When Emily visited with her parents, they stood together by the creek where the rope had been cut away. No sign hung there now. The ground bore only footprints and wind. Thomas didn't claim to have changed the world. He had made a simple choice at the right moment. But sometimes that was enough, to turn a boundary into a meeting place, and a story meant to shame into one that told the truth.